And here's something that is also not ever talked about in mainstream media or is excess deaths. So people don't understand what that means and we've been having excess deaths in all over the world after the COVID vaccine rollout. So people are making a correlation and a connection between people dying at higher rates than they normally do before the vaccine that are doing it now. So they say it comes from can you explain to people what excess death actually means and what are the studies that prove that people are dying at higher rates than they did before the COVID vaccine?
Yeah, well, the data's getting harder and harder to get. In my country, it used to be readily available, but now it's not. They've changed the way the data is collected. We used to have an office called the Office for Healthcare Improvement and Disparities, and they published really good data till about 2023, I think it was, and then they just stopped. They just stopped. I have no idea why. So the data's getting hard to get, but typically, what was done for the early studies and for the data that we used to publish in the United Kingdom is they took the normal amount of deaths. So you'd take it in maybe a 5-year period or a 10-year period before. So if you took the amount of deaths from, say, 2015 to 2019, that would expect so many people per 1,000 to die per year, in that year period. So many people between 60 and 70 would die. So many people between 70 and 80 would die. This is kind of known, and it's generally fairly consistent. Now, there are spikes when there's world wars, or there's spikes when there's major pandemics. If you look at the mortality rates for the bubonic plague episodes in my country, it's going along, and then all of a sudden it goes like that. From the amount of burials and things. So we expect so many deaths. So we take the average of 2015, 2019. That's the baseline we would expect. And then what we did in 2020, 21, 2022, 21 and 2022 especially, we found out that the amount of people that were actually dying was well above that baseline. So basically, you take an average of what you would expect for the population profile, and you found out there was more people dying than that. But after the pandemic, when a lot of the old people had died, the most vulnerable people had already died, you'd expect actually excess mortality to go down because the vulnerable people had already died in, say, 2020. But it actually went up for quite some periods of time. But quite what it is now, it's harder to tell. It's probably down to nearer a baseline now, but it certainly went up in 2021, 2022 in pretty well all countries, including the United Kingdom and the United States. So we had, after a pandemic, when you would expect excess mortality to be lower because vulnerable people had died, we actually found it was higher for a period of time. So what is that temporarily correlated with? Well, we started doing the vaccines in 2021. Excess deaths increased later in 2021, 2022. Does that show that excess deaths are attributable to the vaccines? No, but there are plausible mechanisms where it could be, and there's temporal associations. So, really it would be quite nice if people put all this together and came to some kind of firm conclusion, but who's going to pay for that research?
Right. Nobody's going to pay for that research. And they don't even, and by the way, the
government's not going to pay, pharmaceutical industry is not going to pay. When you do a research job in a university, it's all about funding. Where is the grant going to come from? How you publish to get money from the research assessment exercise, and if the funding's not there,
right,
basically the work's not being done. That's not entirely true. I'm in touch with a group of wonderful people around the world. I'm not going to pick on any of individuals, but your listeners all know them, who are working really very, very hard for absolutely nothing. Purely because they believe that there's things that need to be researched. And I won't name him, but one guy I've interviewed, he basically couldn't afford a house for a period of time, because he was spending all his time working on these projects. So people are doing it, but the institutions that can get the research done and get the papers published, the financial motivation, sadly, is not there. So why a lot of these people died during that period of time, it's probably going to be very difficult to be definitive about. But it is surprising that the way that data was collected changed and the amount of data released was reduced. and it's often difficult to get information even on freedom of information requests. It's almost as if people had something to hide, but of course we couldn't possibly know that, could we? Because we're just the ordinary minions.
October 19th, we'll be in Irvine, California. We'll be in Australia. Then we'll be in Burbank, California the day after Thanksgiving. And then Pottstown, Pennsylvania, December 6th. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets.